The same motivation that induced me to start this work is what keeps me anchored to doing the same thing over the past 25 years. Is that as an ecologist, I could understand that the massive genetic erosion of the species of rice, Oryza sativa, like any other species, massive genetic erosion would lead to enhancement of the extinction probability of that species. In other words, if you lose the genetic diversity of any species, the species is likely to go extinct very fast. Now, in the case of rice, Indian rice, we have already lost more than 90% of the genetic diversity. And I'm talking about 25 years ago, when there was absolutely no work and no concern among the agriculturists and agriculture department or agriculture universities toward conserving the remaining land races of rice variety. Because nobody else was doing anything about it, I felt compelled myself as an ecologist to feel responsible for it, not only as a scientist but also as a responsible citizen, to start doing something, to start conserving these rice varieties until some more competent authorities, competent and expert agriculturists would start doing this. So I started doing that. I left my job in 1996. I started doing that in the hope that in the future it will be taken over by more competent authorities. But so far it has not happened, so I keep doing it, and that keeps me anchored to the same work, conserving. And by these years, by these decades, more than 2 decades now, the number of varieties have increased in number. And so it's not just conservation as a museum. When we say conservation of rice genetic diversity, it has to be conserved in situ. That is, we have to keep the seeds alive, unlike in the distant, remote ex situ gene banks. So we have to grow them every year, each single variety every year, and then give it over to the farmers so that they keep it alive and they promote this cultivation and they spread the seeds every year. That's how it's going on. When we say farmers, we have to bear in mind that farmers is not a homogeneous entity. There are all types of farmers, ethnic diversity, their economic positions. There are rich farmers and urbanized farmers, modernized farmers, green revolution farmers, and tribal farmers. So it depends on what type of farmer we are addressing. In majority of the northern Indian farmers, entire North India, especially UP, Northern Bihar, and West Bengal, for example, they remain recalcitrant to these ideas of traditionalities. They are more motivated toward immediate monetary gain. So they need quick return, monetary return here and now. They don't wait for another 5 years of sustainable yield or yield stability over 10 years and saving of their expenses over the farm. All this, they need immediate benefit, and the higher the benefit, higher monetary return, the better. So in that case, in almost entire North India, including West Bengal, farmers are really recalcitrant to conservation per se, unless they feel it's going to give them an economic return, for example, by a premium price for organic rice, for example. Without that, they are not interested. But if you are looking at the southern Orissa farmers, the tribal farmers in Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, even Gujarat, and northeastern India, for example, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and Manipur, there are hundreds and hundreds of farmers who have taken these kind of, and they themselves are conserving many of those rice varieties on their own initiatives, and they are my best hopes, and they are the greatest strengths in this kind of pursuit. So they don't go for immediate, monetary benefits. It's for the intrinsic value of this diversity. They have been doing this, and they will continue to do that. Now, each of these varieties we collected from the farmers, indigenous farmers, who were, in many cases, those farmers were the last farmers of, who were growing that particular variety. So I had to travel to many remote places. I began all this journey from within West Bengal, traveling across to 12 districts of Bengal, and that included districts in North Bengal to Sundarbans. And whenever I heard that there was some kind of variety, some unique variety which was not grown nearby, and so I traveled to this farmer, collected this a sample of this variety, noted down this, the name and the other characters for which this farmer was growing, like it's salt tolerant variety, or flood tolerant variety, or aromatic rice, and so on and so forth. And then I also took some cues from the same farmer about other farmers that he might know who were growing similar varieties or some other varieties of different characters, which he thinks is important or interesting. So we traveled across to other farmers, and this way, over the past 25 years, my own travel we have actually collected. But we also took help from many other farmers and other organizations, some individuals also, some individual farmers, some individual scientists, and some NGOs. They also helped me with this. They assisted me in collecting. They themselves collected and handed over many of these varieties to me. So the collection accumulated this way over these decades. And the main thing is characterization. The names which are given by the farmers are the real names of the variety. These variety names, whether it's, for example, Kelas, is the local name of that variety which is grown in Bankura district. Another black rice variety is Bhutmuri in Medinipur district, and that is grown by these tribal farmers in Bhutmuri. So we take this cultivar name, and that's the scientific record of that name. Then the main task remains to characterize these. For example, both Kelas and Bhutmuri are black rice varieties. Now we have to make this assessment of 50 different characters of the rice plant to see whether they are identical variety with two different names in two different places, or they are genuinely two different varieties altogether. So for that, we have to assess 56 characters of each variety every year, and then distinguish whether they are individual disparate varieties or the same variety with synonyms. That's the process that we apply, we follow every year. Space is the challenge. I do need a lot of more land, but because I don't receive any funding support from any institution, government or non-government, it's entirely run on donation, and therefore we are resource starved, so to say, and we cannot afford to buy a bigger piece of land. That's the main thing. So we have to accommodate all these varieties in this 1.7 acre of land area. So the space allotted to each variety is no more than 2 meter by 2 meter space, and this is just enough. Just a little bit more than maintaining the minimum viable population for the genetic diversity. We need a minimum number of individuals of the plants to retain the genetic diversity within that particular variety population. So, of course, if each individual plot were a bit bigger for each variety, then the conservation would be more secure, and I'd be happy. But we can't afford. That's the major constraint, the space constraint. The other constraint is that we don't have enough, what you can say, manpower. The number of field staff that we have is just two, uh, and with me it's just three. So three individuals is really difficult to follow all this, to study all the 56 characters of each variety every year. So we'd appreciate if any volunteers come over, because we can't afford to pay a good salary to any other field staff, excepting a few months maybe. So we appreciate and we welcome any students and volunteers, who occasionally come from abroad mostly, and they help in this kind of field classification and characterization of these varieties. I am not just envisioning, I am actually doing what I am doing with all these communities, mainly farmers communities in 10 states of the country. I left West Bengal, and I'm now working. I mean, the farm is now relocated in Orissa, but I'm working in 10 states of the country and giving trainings in agroecology and rice characterization methods to groups of farmers every year, and they get trained. They also pass on the state kind of training to other motivated farmers. I give the seeds, as I told you, I give the seeds for free to anyone, to every farmer whoever comes to collect the seeds. And those farmers, come from 15 states of India. So that spreads, without any kind of governmental aid or whatever. And I don't have to rely on any governmental model, because the government, if the government had done it in any case, then there will be no need of DD or Vasudha in the first place. There will be no need of existence of Devaldev either. So I don't rely on any kind of governmental or non-governmental aid. I am totally relying on the farmers' motivation, farmers themselves, the individual farmers, and in some cases their communities. And that model is spreading far and wide. So over the past 25 years, more than 7,000 farmers directly took seeds from Vasudha. And the condition is that because we don't charge anything, the only condition is that they have to either exchange the seeds with Vasudha, Vrihi, or give it over to other farmers for free. The seeds must be free. Seeds must not be sold. It must not be commoditized. That's our philosophy. So from the beginning of agriculture, 10,000 or 12,000 years ago, seeds have remained commons of the world. So we need this commitment from the farmers, whoever takes the seeds from Vrihi, that they should distribute the seeds for free to other farmers if they cannot return some of the seeds to us. And this way, this circle of exchange expands. The first circle they directly take from Vrihi. The second circle is the exchange between the farmers, whoever taken the seeds, and then give it over to others. And then the third circle, and so on. And to our estimate, is more than 17,000 farmers who have already taken the seeds, directly or indirectly, from Vrihi. And this way, it's expanding. I agree, this is a very small number, considering this but as an individual, this was quite a good number. If mine was a very well-funded organization with a big network of farmers and others that I could establish, then maybe the number could have been much bigger. But that's the model, because we began from the grassroots, and I believe that any kinds of conservation things, so far all the models of successful conservation has always been from the bottom upwards. Efforts from the top downwards approach of conservation, especially in the agrobiodiversity, has always been unsuccessful. The most successful model has to be bottom upwards. So this is what I do. So I don't wait on policymakers or some kind of lawmaking institutions, but always has to go from the grassroots farmers themselves, because they have remained over millennia. They were ultimately the custodians of all these rice varieties. We have screened more than 500 varieties of rice, for example, and different other uncultivated crops, because the farmers and the tribal farmers among whom I work, they also depend a lot for their nutritional security on the wild foods collected from the forest, not just from agricultural fields. So we have made analysis for the first time in the world, so to say, the first nutritional spectrum analysis from of all these wild uncultivated foods, as well as some cultivated crops, especially the indigenous rice varieties. And we have seen the very high nutrient contents in different varieties of rice. Not all rice contains every nutrients, of course. Different varieties contain different degrees of nutritional values. So, for example, we have documented the existence of 80 varieties of rice, for example, which contains more than 20 ppm of iron. The highest iron content, for example, is up to 186 milligram per kg of rice. So 180, 150, 130 milligrams of iron per kg. There are so many of these rice varieties, which are more than 20 to 30 times higher than the genetically modified iron fortified rice, sofa developed. Similarly, we have documented the existence of many varieties of rice, like about 80 varieties of rice with very high content of vitamin B4, more than 130 varieties, 130 varieties of rice with very high content of iron, antioxidants activity, and so on. Obviously, we can always recommend the cultivation and consumption of those rice varieties rather than any of these modern high-yielding varieties, which are extremely poor in nutrient contents compared to any of these traditional varieties. I will just give two examples of this, the climate adaptive crops. I've been telling over these 25 years that our indigenous rice varieties, not just rice, all the crop varieties, indigenous varieties, are our best bet to adapt to the climate extremes. Whatever crisis that the farmers are facing, our agriculture is facing under this threat of climate change. Because these indigenous crop varieties are fine-tuned to the local climatic extremes. Some crops are finely adapted to extreme drought conditions or flood conditions or saline conditions, saltwater incursion along the seawater, along the coasts and all this. So when ILA swept in 2009, that was in the month of May 2009, swept the entire southern coast of West Bengal and Bangladesh. And in the Sundarban area, thousands of hectares of rice farms went out of production overnight because of the seawater incursion. And the institutional agriculture departments, institutional support, whether from the central government or the state government, failed to give one single variety which could withstand this seawater. So there were tons of this kind of rice supply, seed supply to these areas, and nothing survived. So I supplied seeds of 4 varieties of salt-tolerant rice among about 20 farmers initially in that year. In 2009 June, that was the rice growing season, and those were the only farmers who were capable of growing rice and feed their families in that year. And with that, support these farmers, multiplied the seeds, and after years, the numbers of the rice quantities increased, and also the number of beneficiaries, number of farmers growing also increased. And then we also took help from the many local NGOs who distributed this these seeds all across this different districts. I mean different blocks of the Sundarban area. Like NDEV was one NGO, one non-government organization, and many other local organizations like Paschim Sridhar Kati Janakalyan Samiti and many others. So who took up this task of distributing the seeds from Bihi, and distributing far and wide among many farmers. So those are the farmers who are you can say climate resilient. So then they are now equipped with these varieties of rice, salt tolerant varieties of rice, which can adapt, I mean withstand any kind of another event of Aila. Similarly, in the year 2000, when perhaps you remember, that was the year when there was a flash flood in Nadia district because of this, the Farakka Dam. There was a sudden release of this, and there was a flash flood. And in that year, we supplied something like about 20 varieties of rice to Nadia farmers, mainly stationed from a local seed bank that I established in Ushagram, and with the help of this Ushagram Trust, we distributed to about 40 farmers these 20 varieties of rice, which could withstand this flood. Some of these varieties could withstand and grow in 12 feet deep water. So even if in the farms, which were swept with 5 feet deep water, 10 feet deep water, 12 feet deep water, those rice varieties were the only varieties which could survive there, and the farmers were able to feed their families these years. So these are the examples which categorically show, I mean they explicitly show that these are the seeds which can feed these farmers in crisis, in the climate crisis, which no other modern varieties are capable of. So far, our genetic engineers have not yet even capable of producing any such variety with success. The other thing is that even hypothetically, even if we assume that in some future the genetic engineering or transgenics technology will be capable of producing any such climate resilient seeds, that would involve millions and millions of dollars to develop any of these things. And secondly, that will be always privatized, corporatized, so the farmers have to pay through their nose to buy them, and they have to pay this royalty for this proprietary seeds. Instead of that, these traditional varieties, locally owned, farmer-owned, farmer-saved seeds at zero cost, and they are the farmers. So that's my answer to this climate crisis. All these forest villages traditionally were used to be shifting cultivators, and shifting cultivation means agroecology, agroforestry sort of things. So agroforestry, by definition, is a combination of forest food and agricultural food. In this case, the agriculture is not the subtle cultivation. It has to be shifting cultivation, so there will be rotational harvest from patches, and the rotational periods will be much longer. So maybe 10 years to 50 years, 30 years. Now, because of this, the restrictions of their movements and relocation and use of the forest, because of this, the stupid forest restrictions by the forest laws, they cannot move around, very wide space. So they have to become, over the past 50 years, they have become more settled in one place. Nevertheless, they still depend on the forest resources. Now, your question about this, depending on minor forest produce, I really object to this word. Minor forest produce is the term that was invented by the forest department, by the British forest department, the colonial forest system. They are neither minor economically nor ecologically. They are extremely important to the local economy as well as biodiversity. So the scientific term for this, more objective term, would be non-timber forest produce, not just minor. because to the commercial forest department, the commercial emphasis is there on the timber, so that is major. Everything else is minor. But when we talk about food security or livelihood security, then this so-called minor forest produce is the major one. Uh, if we just don't discount this industrial use of this timber and other things. Now, for this non-timber forest produce, the majority of this is foods, and this is a very strong, very stable supplementary source of food for these forest villages. My own study over the past 5 years shows that these forest villages are depending on these forest resources as food for at least 20% of their annual consumption of foods and energy. So about 20, in some cases it's much higher, but I mean the range is between 12% to 25% of all the foods around year round that comes from the forest. Whether it's nutritionally or energetically, it's that huge percentage. So that means that even if there is a kind of very some climatic extreme like drought or pest attack or some kind of climatic vagaries, these people have a very strong, substantial supplementary diet spectrum from the forest. So it's very important. But at the same time, they are also depending on their cultivations of different kinds of crops. It's not just rice. It's a multiple cropping. It's never monoculture. That's the model of green revolution. That is rice after rice after rice. That's monoculture of rice alone. But in those cases, in many of these districts where I work, for example, my own farm is in the district of Rayagada, which is contagious to this Kalahandi, Kannamal, all these Koraput, all these districts, and all the people there, they used to grow in their own farms at least 25 different crops every year. So that includes different varieties of rice and different species and varieties of millets, like pearl millets and finger millets and foxtail millets and so on, and different vegetables, different oil seeds, and different kinds of fruit trees. So that is it's not perennials but permanent ones, or like papaya trees and banana trees that bear fruit for 3-4 years continuously. So that goes on. There's some multitude of this, and this is the model of agroforestry that was developed on all lived continents, all 6 continents of the earth, which are all decimated today, not just in India, but on all continents by the Green Revolution model of industrial agriculture. So, and this is the model that this Green Revolution model is the one that we are opposing, and we are demonstrating the efficacy of the traditional multiple cropping systems in our all trainings. And Basudha is also a training center for agroecology, which is so far the only practical hands-on training in agroecology, and the curriculum of this actually was developed by myself and Professor Stephen Gleesman of University of California, and we are giving a certificate crash course in this, which is totally away and opposed to the mainstream curriculum of agriculture. And we are training this, and there have been many practicing agroecologists today in the country who are demonstrating this on different farms. It's not just organic farming. This agroecology is much beyond this organic farming. So organic farming by itself may not be sustainable as long as you have to put any kind of external inputs. So yeah, so that's how they are growing this. And the unfortunate thing is that with modernization, with the advent of industrial agriculture and modernization, these traditional societies, these forest people, many of them are gradually shifting toward modern agriculture because of this, the impetus of modernization, because they are made to believe that modernization of agriculture using urea and DAP and machinery are more modern and progressive. Otherwise, you cannot climb the social ladder to become civilized. And therefore, they are becoming more dependent on externalities, more dependent on external agencies like bank for loans. They are depending on different government institutions, depending on corporate sector for supply of seeds and agrochemicals like pesticides and herbicides and all this. So this kind of dependence on external agencies and external materials is growing among these societies. So our work is to oppose this process, to stop this process, and to reverse this process, to go back to their own original sustainable mode of agriculture, which had sustained these populations for generations and generations. So this is an uphill task, because whenever you say this kind of thing, that we have to restore this kind of traditional practices, the prompt answer response from especially these urban middle class semi-educated people is that, oh, you're asking them to go back to the caveman stage, prehistoric stone age civilization or something like that. They refuse to believe that you can build a sustainable and comfortable lifestyle and food security around these traditional multiple cropping based agro ecosystem, rather than this kind of industrial monoculture, which is entirely dependent on external supplies, which is not sustainable by definition.